What I'd like to do today is spend a few minutes talking to you about our budget. And by our budget, I mean our budget beginning July 1 in the context of the taxes and fees that were raised, and also in the context of the current state of our economy in Louisiana, and try to give you a little perspective, at least from my point of view. I'm going to have to get down a little bit in the weeds on the budget. We're still trying to figure it out. A lot of my numbers come from the House Fiscal Division. When I talk about the budget today, I'm going to talk about state dollars and I'm going to talk about federal dollars. I'm not going to talk about interagency transfer because that's double counting. I understand the reason for it, but it just confuses things. I'm not talking about the judicial budget. I'm not talking about the legislature's budget. I'm not going to talk about the ancillary appropriations bill where we fund risk management, Office of Group Benefits, the revolving loan funds for clean water. I think that all just that's money that's spent, but it kind of clouds the issue. I'm talking about the operating budget for the executive branch, state dollars, federal dollars. And when I talk about state dollars, I'm going to talk about general fund money, but I also am going to include in that number self-generated fees, and I'm going to include in that number statutory dedications. So those are the terms. If you look at our budget beginning July 1 in a few days, it includes state money, state funds of $14.08 billion as best we can tell. Now, once again, that includes the general fund, self-generated fees, and statutory dedications, $14.08 billion. Federal money of approximately $11.89 billion. It comes out to $25.97 billion. Let's call it $26 billion. And to make it simple, next year in a few days, next year begins, we'll have $14 billion worth of state money and about $12 billion worth of federal money for about $26 billion. Let me put that in context. The current budget, this fiscal year, which ends in a few days, has about $13.3 billion in state money and about $9.7 billion in federal money, for a total of roughly $23 billion. So the budget beginning on July 1 is going to be $26 billion. Once again, all in state and federal, the current budget is $23 billion. Some of that extra money is attributable to the Medicaid expansion program and the federal monies that it attracted. Because of that, and because of the fact we have joined the Medicaid portion of the Affordable Care Act, and it kind of skews the numbers, I want to talk just about state money so we can see where we are. Recall, I just said next year we will have $14 billion worth of state money. Let's put that in context. That's the most money we have had and will have since the boom days after Katrina. I only went back as far as 2008. We've got $14 billion starting July 1. In 2008, we had $13.3. In 2009, $13.2 billion. In 10, $10.7. Then we jumped to $11.5, then 12, then 12.6, then 12.9, then 13.1, then 13.3 last year, and today $14 billion. I'm going to use as the benchmark year the same year that the Legislative Fiscal Office uses, and that's fiscal year 2010, and here's why. You know what happened after Katrina? Unexpectedly, our economy boomed through the influx of American taxpayer money. Our revenues at the state level started going up dramatically. Then we hit the recession of 2008. We're not immune from a national recession. We started going down. our revenues started picking back up with both the storm money and the recession behind us in 2010. In 2010, we had $10.7 billion in state money. Today, we have $14 billion. That is a 31% increase in state money in the last 6 years. Let's talk about Medicaid. Medicaid's easily our biggest expenditure. It's 40% of our budget and climbing with the expansion. Once again, I'm going to give you numbers before the expansion because we don't know how many people we're going to add through the expansion. I think the administration has predicted 350 to 400,000. If we have the experience that other states have had, we will add more than that. But the numbers I'm about to give you are without Medicaid expansion. In 2008, our Medicaid budget was $5.8 billion. That's federal and state. Today, it's roughly $8.3 billion. That's a 43% increase since 2005. Let's talk the state portion of Medicaid. In 2008, out of the general fund, we were contributing $2.1 billion out of the general fund for Medicaid. Today, it's closer to $3.3 billion. That is a 58% increase. If you do the math, it's about 7.3% a year. We cannot sustain that kind of growth. And you say, well, but what about medical inflation? Actually, after the recession of 2008, medical inflation went way down. 3 to 4% nationally increase in healthcare costs was considered high. We have clipped along at about 7.3%. There's simply no way, unless we want to stop funding universities and roads and public schools and general government, to sustain the kind of spending that we have had in Medicaid, in my judgment. So to kind of sum up, next year we'll have a $26 billion budget. That's $3 billion more than this year. Next year we will have $14 billion of state money to spend. That is the most money that we have had since the boom days after Katrina. That is about a 31% increase in state money, not federal, in state money over the past 6 years. All right, where did all this money come from? Well, I think you know the answer to that. Taxes and fees. In the last 365 days, and let me tell you why I'm including the last 365 days. It became clear to me in last year's regular session that as a matter of policy, our legislature had decided to start raising taxes. Now, I know there was a debate about whether they really did, and there was the SAVE program and all of that, which was a gimmick. But the truth of the matter is that the legislature decided as a matter of policy last spring to start raising taxes. And they raised roughly about $800 million. If you add that to the taxes and fees raised this year, under the former taxes were raised under Governor Edwards, the current taxes are under Governor Jindal, the current taxes were raised under Governor Edwards, even though I hasten to add, neither one of them gets to vote on the bill in the legislature. It's ultimately a decision for the legislature. We're looking at about $2.4 billion. Now, I don't want to bore you, but I think it is instructive. I made a list. It might not be complete, but this is what I think they actually raised, and I just want to go through it very, very quickly. The state raised corporation income taxes, corporation franchise taxes, sales taxes on consumers, cigarette taxes, liquor taxes, sales taxes on purchases of machinery and equipment. State raised inventory taxes, personal income capital gains taxes. They reduced the citizens' property insurance credit, which will raise personal income taxes. State raised telephone taxes, taxes on short-term home or apartment rentals, insurance premium taxes, reduced vendor compensation, reduced interest on taxpayer overpayments, business utility taxes, reduced the tax credits for taxes paid to other states, reduced the 3-year carryback option for the net operating losses deduction, reduced the solar tax credit, reduced the severance tax exemption for horizontal wells, reduced the enterprise zone tax credits. That's just the taxes. Now the fees. We're still going through to see which of these passed, but I think most of them did. We will have new fees or fee increases on the state courts, the Office of Motor Vehicles, cemeteries, fishing guides, drones, pipeline operators, clemency investigators, architects, medical records, notaries, oyster farmers, court reporters, crabbers, hunters, school bus drivers, insurance consultants, electric vehicle owners, oil companies, learner drilling permits, contractors, birth certificates, death certificates, towing companies, and I understand they increased the price on veterans' funerals, food vendors, beverage vendors, and that doesn't include the massive fee tax packages which came out of DHH and DEQ in the Department of Agriculture. It's breathtaking. I mean, it's breathtaking. That is the largest tax increase in the last 365 days in Louisiana history. And at the end, the proponents of more taxes wanted more. Many have said it's not enough. They wanted to increase further personal income taxes. Let me tell you the conclusions that I think you can draw from. Well, let me mention one other thing, because this is important. You can't just look at budget and spending and taxes in a vacuum. You've got to look at them in the context of your economy, because there are two critical questions here. One of the critical questions that seemed to dominate discussion at this Capitol was, how much money do we have to spend? How much money does state government have to spend? But that money that they spend doesn't just fall from heaven. We thank heaven for it, but it comes from someplace. It's called taxpayers. So another critical question is, well, how much money do the people of Louisiana have to contribute? We have the third highest unemployment rate right now in America, and rising. We're a point below Illinois. Number one is Alaska. Our unemployment rate is 6.3%. The U.S. average is 5.5. And that 6.3% unemployment rate really masks the real problem. Go down to St. Mary Parish, 9.2%. Go down to Iberia Parish, 9.1%. Our gross domestic product as a state every year is anywhere from $220 to $240 billion. That's the total amount of goods and services we produce. 40% of that, directly or indirectly, is related to oil and gas. Oil and gas exploration, oil field services, maritime, caterers that feed our workers offshore, 40%. And it's not in a downturn. It's not in a recession. It is in a depression. When you couple that with the fact that, take timber production. Timber is hugely important to this state, especially in North Louisiana. It has never recovered since the recession of 2008. It's getting better, but it's not even close to getting well. In March, we had 5,000 homes flood in Louisiana. Most of those people didn't have flood insurance. My point is, this is not a strong economy. And taking a slice, when government comes in and takes a bigger slice out of a healthy economy, is one thing. But when it comes in as the state has done and takes a bigger slice out of a weak economy, that's another thing altogether and makes the situation worse. I think that if you want to try to reach conclusions from this, what I would conclude from it is this. we like to talk about winners and losers at the Capitol. There were two approaches to solving the problem that we have. One approach was to raise taxes. Obviously, another approach was to reduce spending. There were some purists in both camps. There were some policymakers who said, I will not consider cutting any spending, and there were others who said, I will not consider not raising any taxes. And then of course, there were many who did a little bit of both. I think that it is clear that the raise taxes movement won. And of course, the quarterback was Governor Edwards. And I read everybody's, the pundits, and while I respect everybody's opinion, I think you have to conclude that in terms of a winner getting what he wants, Governor Edwards won these last three sessions. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the Louisiana taxpayer lost. And here's why I say that. Before they raised $2.4 billion worth of new taxes and fees, over the past 10 years, our economy had grown 25%. State government had grown 44%. That's before the tax increases. Before they raised the taxes and fees, Louisiana ranked, based on the most recent U.S. Census Bureau data, Louisiana ranked #1 in per capita spending, in state and local per capita spending. Why do I include state and local? Because some states deliver a service or a product at the state level, others at the federal level, or rather others at the local level. So to be fair, to compare apples to apples and states to states, you have to include state and local spending. Before these tax increases, we were #1 in the South in state and local spending per capita. If you just look at state spending, if you don't want to couple state and local, then according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, once again, before $2.4 billion in new taxes and fees, Louisiana was spending 43% more capita than Texas and 71% more capita than Florida. Now that's just a fact. That tells me we had a spending problem, not a revenue problem. Nonetheless, the governor won the day. They raised $2.4 billion worth of new taxes and fees, the largest tax increase in the history of the state, a breathtaking amount. We now have more state money, $14 billion, than we have had in a decade. The budget is $3 billion more beginning July 1 than it is today. And that's just a fact. And they will be back for more. At some point, we have to start talking about the spending side. Now, I want to hit that a lick very fast because you've heard me talk about this before. Because I want to conclude by talking a little bit about TOPS. We missed some extraordinary opportunities to control our spending. There was not a single solitary spending reform passed that I can tell. And frankly, the governor killed most of them. Let me give you some examples. You've heard me talk about contracts. Look, if you go read the Legislative Auditor's report and the Division of Administration report, here's what the Legislative Auditor says, because I understand the division and I disagree over contracts. The division says we only have 15,000, we're reducing. You know what? We don't know how many we have. If you go read the Legislative Auditor's report, this is what he says. He says, as of November 2014, we had 15,000 worth $21.3 billion. Those are professional, personal, consulting, social services. So let's call it 15,000 worth $21 billion. That's what's in the database. But all the contracts aren't in the database. 7 of the 13 classes of contracts are not in the database. That's another 8,000 contracts. And on top of that, there are another 4,599, according to the legislative auditor, that are $20,000 or more that aren't in the database, worth $279 million. Now, I add all of that up, I get 30,000 contracts. The division says it's 15,000. I don't know how they know, because it's not in the database. And the database is down, by the way. Back in November, you could go on La Track and search contracts. All of a sudden, you can't anymore. Was supposed to be fixed by April 1. Now, I understand it's going to be October. Now, I'm not saying that all these contracts are unnecessary. Every time I talk about this, somebody who disagrees with me, and I'm glad to have the debate. They say, "Oh, you want to cut Medicaid? That's a contract." That's true. I've never said that. I've never said cut all the contracts. We got to have an administrator to handle our drug program, for example. Many of these contracts add value, but a lot of them don't. And we don't even know how many we have. And look, I've seen the contracts. You know, I'm not going to go into them. We can talk about contract number 717427, where they gave $552,000 to the University of Tennessee to study the effects of the Macondo oil field. I asked about that. They said they couldn't find somebody in one of our universities. We've got a $1.3 million contract for after-school tutoring with New Orleans, South Africa. I've asked about that. I said, how come we can't use UNO or SUNO or Delgado? I've asked about the $64,000 contract number 703515, where they hired for $64,000 a year somebody to teach ballroom dancing at the student union. Well, I mean, I hadn't ballroom danced in a while, but I think it's probably a wonderful thing to do, but it's a matter of priorities. We've got consulting contracts with God's Little Angels, a group called Little People's PlayStation, Angels in Training, the Open World Family Services, the Hip Hop Music Company. And I'm not saying the money's wasted. The truth is, we don't know. Is anybody doing any metrics on whether taxpayers are getting money's worth? Is anybody asking, well, maybe could we spend some of this money for TOPS, and if it's federal money, could we run it through our universities? I'm going to give you one more example. There's a story just broke in New Orleans. Back in 2009, the Department of Health and Hospitals gave a $3 million consulting contract to a group called Alternatives Living out of New Orleans to provide help for the disabled. In 2013, the legislative auditor did an audit and said, hey, Alternatives Living owes $1.3 million in state and federal taxes, payroll taxes. I don't know whether they weren't collecting payroll taxes or whether they were collecting them and putting them in their pocket. You know what DHH did? Nothing. In 2014, Fox 8 New Orleans did a story on Alternatives Living. Found that they were spending a good bit of that for a $3 million fee from the state on, let's see, going to restaurants, paying the kids tuition, going to spa treatments. They went on 2 cruises. They went to the Bahamas. They went to Las Vegas. They showed up at the interview with Fox 8 in a leased Mercedes. DHH was asked about it. You know what DHH's response was? You can look it up. It was either in the Picayune or the Advocate. We think they're providing good services. The legislative auditor says, let me check Fox 8 report. The legislative auditor goes and issues a 27-page report and says, yep, Fox 8 is right. You know what DHH did? Nothing. 2 weeks ago, the federal government indicted them. We'll never get that $4 million back, folks. Never. And you say, well, that's anecdotal. That's anecdotal. Maybe. Maybe it's happening a whole bunch. But the truth of the matter is we don't know. There's some other innovative things going on. You know, California and Ohio are investigating right now tying the cost of their prescription drugs and their Medicaid program to the prices paid by the Veterans Administration, which is able to negotiate drug costs. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's going to save hundreds of millions of dollars. We've just expanded Medicaid. I didn't see any discussion of expanding it using consumer-driven health care. Go take a look. I mean, we're not the first group that expanded Medicaid. Go look at the Indiana health plan. I mean, they're using health savings accounts, co-pays, and premium payments with high deductible, high risk insurance to control their costs. And the Medicaid recipients are very happy, and they're saving money. Look at the abuse. I want to read you an email I got on the emergency room abuse, and it does happen. President Obama's Dr. Donald Berwick, who was running CMS, testified before Congress. 10% of all the spending in Medicaid in Louisiana is fraud. It's not just fraud by the patient, it's fraud by the provider. That's just a fact. Other states are doing something about it. You go out to California. California started using, I don't completely understand it, but they use data analytics with special algorithms they designed. I'll give you an example. If I go this afternoon to Memphis and buy $10,000 worth of clothes, I'm going to get a phone call from my credit card company. They're going to say, hey, Kennedy, are you in Memphis? Did you buy clothes or did somebody steal your card? They use data analytics and special algorithms to tell things that are out of the norm. California's doing that to try to catch fraudulent claims in Medicaid before they're paid. Because they found out the old pay and chase doesn't work. If you wait and audit everybody afterwards and then say, well, they stole money, and you go to them and catch them, guess what? They don't have the money. There's so many things we could do to try to save money. And I just really think we missed a great opportunity this session to do it. And I'll give you one final example. You know, this TOPS, it'll help me segue into TOPS. At one point, we were short $183 million in the TOPS program. The House said, okay, we know we're spending, this is over a 3-year period, $20+ billion on consultants. I think that's low, but we've certainly privatized a whole lot in the last 10 years. I think that's low, but let's assume, I think most reasonable people would agree with that figure. The House said, okay, we're going to fill the TOPS hole, $183 million, by reducing the number of consulting contracts by $183 million. And it's not across the board, and we're not micromanaging. We're just telling the managers to manage and do their job. Pass the House, problem solved. That bill died in the Senate Finance Committee. Every single Democrat, every single Republican voted against it, because the governor lobbied them, beat them like a sugar mill mule to kill that bill. And then when a bill came to the Senate to actually give them supervision over the contracts, they said, we don't want it. We don't even want the authority to say no. You can draw your own conclusions. My conclusion is that now more than ever, we've got a spending problem, folks, and we're not doing anything about it. And they raised $2.4 billion in new taxes and fees. That's a state record. It's breathtaking. It's been done in an economy that's weak as rainwater. And you know what? It's not going to solve the problem. They're going to be back for more, and as long as they don't get control of their costs, we're still going to run deficits. On TOPS, here's why I think we'll be able to fully fund TOPS in the spring. I think the House did a very wise thing by pushing the proposed cut off until the spring. I think the TOPS was, to a large extent, a manufactured crisis. I think I put it up in the same category of, we went through the phase where we're going to eliminate LSU football. One of the governor's lieutenants at one point said he was going to close down Nicholls State. We went through closing the kidney dialysis machines. Then we segued into, okay, now TOPS is the crisis du jour. TOPS is short. It's about 70% funded. TOPS, well, a lot of people don't realize that the program began in 1998. We've helped about 650,000 kids. It's cost us $19 billion since $1.9 billion, since 1998. Since 1998, we spent $3 billion on prisons. What do you think is a better investment? In terms of funding it, here's where I think we'll find the money. First, our revenues have been improving. The bottom for this fiscal year was in December. We were down 15%. May numbers showed us only down 8%. We're still down compared to last year, but the trend's in the right direction. I'll talk about the corporation income taxes in a second. This year's budget is based on $37 oil. Right now, the budget is based on $37 oil. Next year's budget, I am told, I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, is based on $30 oil. I don't know why the REC kept it at $30. But if you just base it on the same thing we're basing the price of oil on in this budget, you just picked up, some people say 15 million times 7. In 36 of our parishes, as a result of the flooding, our people and our small businesses got extensions to pay their taxes. That money hadn't come in yet, but it's going to be coming in. Let me say a word about corporation income taxes. Somebody announced that was accepted as gospel right before the critical tax votes, well, we're going to be short $200 million in corporation income taxes this year. A new crisis. Well, we're on an accrual because it's not going to come in by the end of June. Well, we're on an accrual system, folks. We've got until 45 days after the fiscal year. The other factor you've got to consider, we went through, how many amnesties did the legislature do? 6 or 7? I don't know. We were doing one every Thursday there for a while, okay? A lot of the reason corporate income and corporation income and franchise taxes are down is because people prepaid. You can only prepay one time. At some point, those corporation income and franchise taxes are going to come back to normal, assuming we don't start doing tax amnesties again. The third factor, aside from the economy affecting corporation income and franchise taxes, is last spring when they changed the exemptions and the deductions, a lot of businesses, being rational business people, took advantage of them before they could expire. That's also a one-time thing too. The other point I would make is a lot of the bills didn't have fiscal notes. One in particular, Act 23 from the first special, had a zero fiscal note. It's brought in $7 million. I know there's some additional money coming in. About $21 million is going to be turned over to the state in a few weeks. Our high-risk health insurance pool is going to be dissolved as a result of the Affordable Care Act. It contains $21 million. That's going to be, I alerted the leadership about this in the session. I don't think it's built into the budget. Now, right now, it's supposed to go to the mega fund. I guess if they want to spend it on the mega fund, they can, but I would rather see it spent on the TOPS program. We're going to be turning over another $2.5 million in about a few days in unclaimed property from the federal government for wrongful foreclosures. That goes into the general fund. I'm going to contribute from my budget. We're trying to figure out exactly, everybody's trying to figure out what their budget was, but as best I can tell on mine, I started here, then as a result of the mid-year reductions, I went way down here, and then I came up, and I think at the end I'm slightly ahead. And if we are, we're going to be, at Treasury, we're going to turn back in about $300,000 to $350,000 from my budget that I don't think I'll need. That's not, well, I think it's a lot of money, but that's out of a $10 or $11 million budget. But the real reason I think that we're going to have enough money is this. This budget forecasting is not a science, okay? I know the governor, and I certainly respect him and his office and his opinion, said we're $600 million short. We're $600 million short. It became gospel. That's a guess, folks. That is an estimate. It could be $900 million. It could be $300 million. These $2.4 billion worth of taxes I just talked about in fees, they may bring in $3 billion. They may bring in $2.1 billion. You just don't know. But our legislative fiscal office started doing fiscal notes in a very conservative way, which I think is very prudent. And I think there's an excellent chance that we will bring in enough money to fully fund TOPS. So that's why I thought that the House did the right thing, and I truly hope that the governor won't veto what the House did, because I think he'll be hurting a lot of TOPS students and a lot of TOPS parents needlessly. I've got about 10 minutes for questions. Thank you for listening to me.
Treasurer, tell us, what's your message here today?
The Louisiana taxpayer just got poorer, and Louisiana state government just got richer. Our new budget year begins July 1. The budget's going to be $3 billion more next year than we have this year. So the idea that we don't have any money is a bunch of nonsense. Over the past 365 days, the Louisiana legislature has raised $2.4 billion in new taxes and fees. That's the largest tax increase in the history of our state. It's a breathtaking amount. It was done at the encouragement of Governor Edwards. He won. I mean, he won. He got what he wanted. The tax and spenders clearly won in these last three legislative sessions. But I'll tell you who lost: the Louisiana taxpayer. There was way too much time spent down at the Capitol talking about how much money do we in government have to spend. There was no time that I could see spent talking about, well, how much money do the working families and the small businesses in this state have to spend. And they're the ones that got to come up with the money. We had a spending problem going into all this. We've still got a spending problem. I don't care how high they raise taxes. As long as they don't get control of their costs, we're going to run deficits.
What are some parts of the state budget that are requiring some balancing or some reduction in order to smooth things out?
Consulting contracts. We got at least, I think, 18,000 and probably a lot more. We don't need all of them. Some of them we do need. We don't need all of them. Number two, Medicaid fraud. The Obama administration has testified before Congress that 10% of our Medicaid spending is fraud. We'll never get rid of all of it, but if we got rid of 20% of it, we could save $200 or $300 million. People go into emergency rooms for routine care to get a pregnancy test, to have a wart removed that taxpayers have to pay for. That's a needless expense. 22% of all of our managers in state government manage one employee. Average manager manages 4. Normal span of control would be 1 to 8. We got too many generals, not enough foot soldiers. The generals make a lot more money. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff we can do to save money, but it takes work. It's hard, and you have to tell somebody no. Raising taxes compared to the hard work of reducing spending is pretty easy. Politicians do it and then hope that voters will forget by the next time they run for office.
What have some other states done to control Medicaid costs?
Oh, the Patient Navigator program in California and Oregon and Texas, they put a paraprofessional at the entrance of every emergency room. They intercept patients who come in and want to spend $700 of taxpayer money on a pregnancy test, get them a private clinic. That's one example. Other states are looking at tying their prescription drug costs and Medicaid to the VA prices and saving a lot of money. There are hundreds of things we can do.
If people have questions like more information about the state budget, what should they do?
They can go to my website at LA Treasury, LATREASURY.com, and there's a number on there they can call me.